Okairi, welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be doing my worst books of 2021. Now, when I say worst books, it could be a book that I hated. It could also be a book that just disappointed me and didn't, meet my expectations that I had for it. Not necessarily that it's a terrible book, but these were the books that had the worst reading experience for me in 2021. This first one, however, I read in January, and I still hate it with every fiber of my being. And that is The Moon and the Other by John Kessel. Now, as I said, I read this in January. It was the book club pick for the Only Good Book Club. And I cannot express to you how much I hated reading this book. The premise sounded really, really interesting. It's a sci-fi book about different communities of people who live in space. So that's not a very good description. That's a lot of sci-fi. Let me try to remember what this was about because it was in January. I just remember like the visceral feelings of hate. But let me see if I can remember the plot a little bit here. Okay, right. So this is like a post-Earth living world where people live on different planets and there's also different types of societies. So there's matriarchal societies. No, wait, they live on the moon. Hold on. Okay, so this is a like post-living only on Earth world where people can live in other like planets, I believe, and other places in the universe. But they're talking specifically in this book about the moon, I think. And there's a lot of different cultures on the moon. So there's a matriarchal culture, there's an Islam-based culture. So it's supposed to play with all of these different ideas. What if these were the bases for the society we live in? And how would they interact with each other? However, this book, I have an entire rant review for this book, so I'm just going to link it up above and down below if you want to know more details. But essentially, this book, the male gaze feel of this book was overwhelming. All of the female characters in this book were over-sexualized and entered the page in a sexual context. Only the male characters didn't, and that kind of gaze was just, oh my god, it has dirty little fingers all over this book. I hated it so much. There was also this one point when a bomb went off and there were casualties everywhere, and the narrator started talking about how a fair few of these bodies had erections. Like, why would you put that on a page? Why did I have to read that with my two eyes? There's also this weird side plot of like elevated dogs where dogs can speak and like become part of society, but they're still like second-class citizens. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. I think that this could have some interesting social commentary. Nope, just a side plot, weird thing. I think the author was just like, what about talking dogs? That'd be cool, and he threw it in there and didn't even try to integrate it into the story whatsoever because it was just laid on top of the world. It wasn't integrated at all. So yeah, I hated this book. I don't even remember what the goal of this book was, but if I wasn't reading it for the book club, I would not have finished it. So yeah, this was read in January and it's still my least favorite book of the year. And if I could give this 0 stars, I would, but considering I can't, I gave it the 1 star that I reserve for books that make me angry. Okay, so my camera died like instantly, but I know that I charged this before I put it away, so this is some kind of witchcraft and I'm upset. But here we are. Okay, maybe I need a new battery. Maybe it can't hold on to its charge anymore. So if the angle has changed, there's your disclaimer. But I don't know exactly where I was in my rant of The Moon and the Other, but suffice it to say, do not recommend. If you want to see more details right after I read it, where I tell you kind of more in detail about the plot when it was fresh in my mind, please go ahead and watch my rant review up above and down below. I'll have it linked. The next book on this list, though, is not full of hate, but that is These Violent Delights. Now, this was a DNF from me. I went into this book expecting to love it. A lot of people who have similar tastes to me have enjoyed it, and I love Asian-based fantasy, especially something with the unique premise of like a Romeo and Juliet retelling. That sounded really interesting to me. However, this book was anything but interesting to me. I got about 20% through this book, and I could not get through 2 or 3 pages without looking around my house, being like, oh, I need to do laundry, I need to clean that, I need to do that, and just being completely distracted from the world that I was supposed to be, engaged with. So yeah, this book just it couldn't grip me. I gave it, like I said, until about 20%. I didn't give it a rating on Goodreads, obviously, because it became a DNF. But I'm glad that this worked for so many people, but it just didn't work for me. This next book I do actually physically have, which is The Kingdom of Liars. I still think this is absolutely gorgeous, and it was the cover was a big part of me buying this. There were a couple reviews here and there of people who enjoyed it, but it was the cover that really pulled me into this, and the premise, which is that we follow a son from like a disgraced family who has a claim to the royal bloodline, but his life is shit, basically. And in this world, there is a moon that is shattered, and so pieces of this moon break off and fall down to Earth, and if you find one, sometimes they will give you a prophecy. And I was so excited for this. However, our main character, Michael, is insufferable. I hate him so much, and I'm okay with unlikable characters. One of my favorite books this year is Along the Razor's Edge, whose main character is just this horrible bitch of a person, and I love Eska so much. So I'm okay with dislikable characters. But this character, he's just a whiny, he just laments his life and does nothing about it. And the thing is, if you establish a character like that, it provides a lot of room for character growth and satisfaction of the reader. This is slipping out of its case a lot, and the satisfaction of the reader as his character grows. However, this character growth takes 80% of this book. We're just stuck. We're stuck without any character growth for that amount of time in this character's head, in Michael's head, and the number of times he repeats his last name, which is Kingman. I'm a Kingman, I'm a Kingman. I'm like, I know! Can you not? I think that this had so much potential, and I do know people who liked it. I think the reason I got so upset, and still am upset, is because I was so excited for it. The premise sounded amazing. So I think, it does work for some people, but for me, viewing this story through the perspective of the main character ruined it for me, because I just couldn't stand anything that was happening. So unfortunately, this book just was not what I wanted. When I first read it, I did give it a 2.5 because the ending of this book implies that the second book is possibly going to be what I wanted this first book to be. The characters that are introduced, the growth that finally happens, the plot points that kind of converge and become more important makes me feel like the second book might actually be what I wanted this one to be. But I don't know if I'm willing to read the second book to find out. So I originally gave this 2.5. I may drop it down to 2. I'm not sure. This was not a horrible book by any means. I think it could work for some people. It just did not work for me. The next book on this list is Calling on Dragons. This is the third book in a quartet. I don't know the name of the whole quartet. Oh, maybe it's the Enchanted Forest series. And the first book is Searching for Dragons. And that book was amazing. I loved the series when I was young. It's a middle grade. And I remember checking these books out over and over again from the library when I was young. And I decided to reread it this year. And the first book was as amazing as I remembered. It was witty. It had all of these fairy tale tropes. I loved it. But then, and the second book was also very good. But then the third book just had a complete drop in quality for me. This was a 2-star read for me. We were introduced to a new character, and we had a new character perspective that just did not mesh well with what we had already kind of established in the world. And at this point, the storyline, in the first 2 books, it was cute that it was predictable, but by the third book, you're like, okay, I know exactly what's going to happen here. In the fourth book, in the finale, it was kind of remedied. I think that some of those plot beats were changed up a bit, and it was an enjoyable conclusion. But the third book really struggled with having the exact same plot, along with characters that just didn't match. So would I still recommend the series? Yes, especially the first book. If you want to get the creme de la creme of what this series is capable of. The first book nails it. So basically we follow our main character, Cimarine, who is a princess, but she doesn't want to do princessy things. It's just not her thing. And so naturally, the thing that she decides to do is to run away and find a dragon to kidnap her. Because if she's kidnapped, they can't expect her to be, you know, taking care of the kingdom. And so the dragons in this book all have really distinct personalities. They've never had a princess come to them and say, "Would you mind kidnapping me? Oh, so kindly. You know, would you mind?" And they've never had that experience before. And just seeing the comical setup there, it was just chef's kiss, beautifully done. So while the third book is on this list of the worst books of the year for me, I do still think the first and the second book are definitely worth your time. This next one just breaks my heart because I wanted to like it so much and I really expected to, but that is The Jasmine Throne. This seemed like everything I love in books. Political, like high adult fantasy with a sapphic, you know, relationship in it, devious plots, a magic system based on nature. Like, oh my God, this sounds like everything that I would adore in a book. However, the application of these things it did not work for me. I was just so bored through this whole book. Like, I was reading it and I was like, I was page counting how many pages I have left. And that is a sign that I'm not enjoying a book. And I was constantly doing that. I was also buddy reading this with Sophia from Fantasy Book Addict, and both of us were really struggling at the middle point there. And I think if it wasn't a buddy read, I might not have been able to push myself to finish it. Now, that being said, I don't think it's a bad book, because I do think that the political setup and like I said, the magic system is so unique and interesting that was something that gripped my attention. However, the amount of time we spent on that seemed very minuscule to me. I don't know exactly what we were doing in between that. Like, I mentioned this in my review that I recently did in my wrap up for it, where I don't remember what we were doing when I was bored, but we were doing something that wasn't the things that I was interested in. Does that make sense? Like, I don't remember what the page time was spent doing, because even though I was interested in the concepts, I feel like they weren't explored. Also, the sapphic relationship was so dry. There was never a spark. Like, I didn't care about their relationship whatsoever, which kills me because I love sapphic relationships. It's just like I have a soft spot for them, especially like women in power or who are morally gray. And I was just so excited for this, and it didn't work, and it hurts my heart. But I ended up giving this a 3-star, but upon reflection, I think I'm going to drop it down to a 2.5 just because my reading experience doesn't reflect a 3-star. It just doesn't. We've got 2 more to talk about, and this next one was also a really big surprise for me because, again, I expected to love this, and that is The Pariah. So I got this as an ARC from NetGalley because I started a NetGalley account this year, and the feeling of getting ARCs is unmatched. I need to control my requests, but like I'm tempted to continue to request at the rate that I have, but I can't keep up, so let me not do that. But this is one of the first ARCs that I was approved for and received. And this is from Orbit Books, which is a publishing company that I really, they usually hit the nail on the head for me, not just with cover art, but that as well. But with the stories, I tend to really like what they put out. Anthony Ryan is also an author that I've been wanting to try for a long time, so I was really hyped to get this. But again, it just didn't meet my expectations. Similar to The Jasmine Throne, I was bored for large stretches of this. And I found my attention wandering. It took me way longer to read than it should have. And this book also had themes, much like The Jasmine Throne, that I love. So it had political intrigue, it had like religion as a catalyst in this world, like a controlling force in society. And I love when religion is tackled from this kind of like critical lens, not just like, oh, religion bad, but like from a lens from different perspectives. I love that. And so I was really excited to see that in this book. There was also a character very reminiscent of Joan of Arc, and that's always been like a historical figure that I've had an interest in. So this book had like the makings of everything that I really enjoy. But it just, I don't know. I know a lot of people really enjoy this book. I've seen a lot of really good reviews, but it did not work for me. I just found my attention wandering. I didn't give a shit about any of our characters. And I finished reading it because I wanted to know what happened at the end, but I didn't care what happened at the end. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know how to describe that any other way, but like I wanted to see the plot points come to their conclusion, but I didn't really care either way what the conclusion was. Does that make sense? I'm still gonna try some other books by Anthony Ryan. I know people that have similar tastes to me who really love his other series. What is it? Bloodsong, I think. So I am interested in reading some other works, but this particular book was a 2.5 for me. And finally, the book that I think breaks my heart the most out of all of these, which is Redemptor, the sequel to Raybearer. So I recently did a wrap-up of this where I went into detail, so again, I'll have that linked up above and down below. But Raybearer was one of my favorite books of this year. YA fantasy has not really been working for me at all this year, but Raybearer was the exception to that. I loved that book with all of my heart. I loved our main character, Tarisai. I loved the magic system and how it had to deal with like relationships between people and caring for people. I loved everything about that book. And so I was so excited to get this, like to the point where I ordered the Illumicrate box, which was very disappointing, by the way. I was so scarred from that actually that I didn't order the Greenbone Saga box, and now I'm seeing the quality of that is so much better. And I'm so sad because I wanted that. But I was so jaded from this box that I didn't do it. Anyway, FOMO rant out of the way. I have this, Illumicrate edition of the two books, and they are very pretty. But they were a pretty penny, and I was so excited to have like this in my collection. However, this book was missing everything I loved in Raybearer. The way that the characters related to each other, the time we spent with them, seeing Tarisai, have this softness to her that, main female characters don't tend to have in this type of world, and seeing her thrive, not in spite of, but because of that. And the way that the political aspects were left at the end of Raybearer had me so excited for this book, but none of that was there. All of the characters, we meet a shit ton of characters in this book. I don't want to give anything away from the first book because it's still absolutely worth your time, so no spoilers here, but Tarisai has to connect with a large number of characters in this book based on how the last book finished. And we just meet all these characters like rapid fire, spend almost no time with them. And then once their usefulness to the plot, is completed, they're just like shunted off the page. Like we never see them again until, the plot requires them again, which is sometimes never. I also saw the themes that Ifueko was going for in this book. The idea of like societal change and who's going to do it first, and how do you cope with and face the atrocities of the past. And I saw these themes, but there wasn't enough time. There wasn't enough time to tackle everything that wanted to be tackled in this book. And this is one of the times when I can firmly say, if this had been a trilogy, I think this would have worked really well. We could have spent this second book getting to know all of our new characters, seeing character development, setting up plot points for like this explosive conclusion in the third book. But it being a duology and it being as short as it is, the conclusion happened so quickly, and I was just kind of like, oh, that's it, in the end. And because things were so rushed, the payoff was not rewarding. Also, there was this weird kind of love triangle-ish thing that reminds me of with Mistborn, the second book in Mistborn, my least favorite book in that series. There's this character named Zane who's supposed to be, I don't want to give anything away, but there's this character named Zane who's supposed to be like this love triangle-ish, aspect, and we're supposed to actually think that he poses a threat to, the relationship that we already have going. The character here, I forget his name right now, but he was just like Zane, and I was like, this is a waste of page time because I know exactly what's going to happen here. I can predict this whole story. Like, why are you investing page time and trying to make me think otherwise? Because I think it was pretty clear. Overall, I could really see what the goal was with this, but it just didn't achieve it. It just needed more page time. It needed more work, you know, which just sucks. It really sucks. So this is the one that's probably the most disappointing for me here. And I ended up giving this a 2 stars. As you can see, 6 out of these 7 books were like disappointing reads that didn't meet my expectations, and only one of them was a hate read. So I think overall I had a really, really good reading year, which you'll see when I film my best books. I'm not sure which one's going to be going up first, but I will be filming that soon. And I had a really hard time narrowing it down to 20. And even within those 20, I like can't bring myself to rank them. So I had an amazing reading year overall. 7 duds is like nothing, you know, for the over, 90 books that I've read so far this year. And there's still a couple weeks, so. I would love to hear your thoughts on these books in the comments down below. Did you love them? Did they hit the right note for you? Do you think I'm completely wrong? I'd love to chat. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. I'd love to have you as part of this community, and I appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jane!